This is Outside Source on BBC News for viewers in the UK and around the world. We are covering all the very latest coronavirus developments here in Britain and also globally. Our headlines. The EU sets out plans for a phased return of travel across Europe as it tries to kickstart a tourism industry that has been decimated by the pandemic.
Hotels, restaurants, beaches, other tourist sites, they need to be run in a way that minimises the risk of passing on the coronavirus.
After 7 weeks of lockdown, many people in England return to work. Amidst warnings, the UK economy faces a significant recession.
It is now, yes, very likely that the UK economy will face a significant recession this year, and we are in the middle of that as we speak.
President Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, has been released from prison and is under house arrest because of coronavirus concerns. And we'll look at how the coronavirus is hitting Bali as the pandemic empties the island's crowded streets of visitors. A warm welcome to the programme. I'm Kasia Madeira. The European Union has been setting out proposals for a gradual resumption of travel and tourism as the industry tries to survive following the coronavirus lockdowns. Here's the EU Commissioner Margherita Vestager outlining the measures.
We need carefully reopen borders within Europe. So we have adopted guidance for Member States on a gradual, coordinated lifting of restrictions on the free movement in Europe. Second, people need, of course, to be able to travel between European countries. So we are giving guidance on how to gradually reopen transport links without risking the health of travellers or transport workers. Third, travellers and workers, they need to know that the places that tourists visit, that they are safe. Hotels, restaurants, beaches, other tourist sites, they need to be run in a way that minimises the risk of passing on the coronavirus.
Well, tourism normally accounts for 10% of the EU's economic output, and these plans involve countries working together to gradually remove travel bans and then border checks. Germany has announced that there will be a gradual easing of its border controls, starting from the 16th of May, when its border crossings with France, Switzerland and Austria will be opened. For more on the German government's position, here's Jenny Hill in Berlin.
We heard from Angela Merkel today, who I think, given her love of the European project and the internal market, is very keen to start reopening borders. But Germany's position is that it's not simply a matter of what the infection rates are like in those neighbouring states. It's also to do with what kind of measures are in place. So she said today there's no point in reopening a German border with a neighbouring country if restrictions and measures aren't symmetrical on either side of those borders. So I think there's a lot more work to be done, although Germany has now said that come the middle of June it will lift border restrictions as long as a number of those caveats are met. And of course, chief among them is the question of how well those neighbouring countries are doing when it comes to keeping the outbreak under control.
Well, another country that has a huge interest in reopening its borders to tourists is Greece. And here's the Greek Minister for Tourism.
We will safeguard the health of both our population and our visitors by ensuring, as I said, that depending on the agreements that we'll make with other countries and on a pan-European level, that we can use either tests or other means to limit the risk of spreading the virus.
So their strategy is testing and on a grand scale. But before the pandemic, Greece used to receive around 30 million foreign visitors a year. So it's going to be a huge undertaking to ensure that tourism there this year does not spread the virus. Well, for more on how the new EU travel guidelines will actually work in practice, here's our Europe editor, Katya Adler.
Public health and national borders in time of crisis, that's up to EU members to decide for themselves what happens, and it'll be the same when it comes to tourism. Each EU country will decide for itself when to open its beaches and its borders to European tourists. Brussels can only advise, and the advice today was slowly, yes, European economies like the UK's have been hard hit by COVID-19, and tourism is an important part of the economy, especially for Mediterranean countries countries like Spain and like France. But the Commission advises that nobody should open for tourism unless they've got very good testing and tracing capacity for COVID-19 and unless there's strict controls on transport, on accommodation and leisure activities. And like with all of the lifting of lockdown measures, if there's a new spike in infections, then travel restrictions could be reintroduced pretty quickly. So basically, don't pack your summer swimsuit just yet.
Well, I want to put that point by Katya to Tom Hall, who is Vice President of Experience at The Lonely Planet. Tom, so our Europe editor saying don't pack your swimsuit just yet. How is this going to work out in reality?
Well, I think that most holidaymakers can be optimistic but so cautious. I think key points in all of this is going to be a slow process. It's going to go country by country or region by region. As we're just hearing, some countries are out slowly, some are not there yet, and others there are just a huge amount of unanswered questions on.
So are we going to be looking at these kind of border bubbles like the Baltic bubble with Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania initially easing travel restrictions, or Germany, Austria, France easing travel restrictions between those countries? Are countries going to group up in that case?
I think that is a definite early step that we're going to see. Clearly, we're already talking about some of those that you talked about, travel possibly between the UK and Ireland and France being a possibility earlier before you could get to other destinations. And the very first thing is actually domestic travel. People either going to loved ones or maybe taking a holiday a little bit closer to home. And I think one of the most robust areas of demand at the moment across Europe is for domestic travel and particularly self-catering. We don't really know what's happening with a lot of hotels and camps at home and further afield. So people are looking for as much certainty as they can get in cases. That means planning a holiday at home.
And when it comes to testing being at the forefront of enabling people to travel, when you hear figures like 30 million people crossing into Greece over the holiday periods, that's an awful lot of testing. Is that really realistic?
Well, I mean, tourists, anybody travelling, over the next few months is going to experience business very much as unusual, a series of new experiences. And this whole question mark for testing at a scale like that, what it might like and how it might work in conjunction with tracing apps. We've heard the idea of tracing apps need to be a pan-European initiative, and very unusual experiences when people are passing through airports and on planes. Ryanair announced that they're planning on resuming 40% of flights, but you need to the toilet when you're on those. You will need to wear a mask, and you will need to have as contactless a process flowing through the airport as possible. That might result in significant queues, or it might actually in some cases result in people moving through areas of airports much slower than they have done in the past. And then when people get there, possibly enforce distance beaches and in other leisure facilities. So quite a few unanswered questions, but certainly the future state of travel means there's going to be a few more hurdles to get through, quite a few sacrifices in order for people to get somewhere and enjoy it. But in all of that, having people been through the last few months, the idea of a holiday appeal of it, I think is going to still be a very, very strong.
Tom, thank you so much. Tom Hall there from The Lonely Planet. And apologies to our viewers for a bit of a drop out there in Tom's line, but I think you get the gist of what he was saying, that it's not going to be business as usual, certainly not anytime soon. The UK has been told it is facing a significant recession by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. According to the Office for National Statistics, the economy shrank by 2% in the first 3 months of this year, and that only includes the first few weeks of the coronavirus lockdown. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
At Denroy Plastics in Bangor, Northern Ireland, they are happy to help the national efforts on personal protective equipment. But what they really want to be making is aeroplanes. And with empty industry order books, they now face further pressure from the threat of a travel quarantine.
I think the aerospace supply chain in general are all looking at their strategies. They're reviewing how that's going to be in the future. They're trying to estimate what that might mean in terms of the capacity they have to provide. I think it would be naive to suggest that everyone will get through this. Unfortunately, there will be casualties.
It's the extreme situation in industries like this that have led to this economy-wide number. The British economy shrinking by 2% in the first 3 months of this year. The last time that the economy performed that badly was the financial crash at the end of 2008. In fact, since modern records began, there have only been 4 other occasions when we've seen a worse economic decline over 3 months. And economists forecast that the current quarter will see a hit much, much worse, off the historical scale, and that all but confirmed by the Chancellor.
As you know, a recession is defined technically as 2 quarters of decline in GDP. We've seen one here with only a few days of impact from the virus, so it is now, yes, very likely that the UK economy will face a significant recession this year, and we are in the middle of that as we speak.
When you get across the country, empty streets, empty offices, empty skies and empty shopping centres, you get a shrinking economy, the start of a recession that is down to the pandemic and the shutdowns. But the economy was already stagnant when the virus hit, and the idea that coming out of this, all the lights that were switched off in the economy to protect our health will suddenly be turned back on, that is looking rather hopeful now.
Thanks to Faisal there. Now, some people in England returned to work today after the government relaxed lockdown restrictions. Workers who can't do their jobs from home were allowed to go back to work, but they were advised to avoid public transport if they could. In London, the number of people on the Underground before 10 a.m. was just over 83,000. That's around 7% higher than the same time last Wednesday. But just put that into context. On the same day a year ago, there had been nearly 1.2 million journeys by 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, not all public transport was quiet, however. Let's have a look at some pictures from Stratford in East London. And as you can see, people spilling off a bus on their way to work. Far too many people to allow for proper social distancing. The Transport Workers Union, the RMT, says the government has not done enough to prepare England's transport system.
There is a balance to be struck, and that's why you would expect there to have been a phased, incremental return to work under control. Not just an announcement from a politician, I want you to go back to work tomorrow, pretty much if you're a blue-collar worker, but if you're in a management grade, in the financial industries, in the media and other sectors, you can stay at home. But the blue-collar workers of this country have been exhorted to go back to work, but the protections have not been put in place for them on the transport system.
Well, during today's Prime Minister's questions, Boris Johnson addressed the concern that London's transport network would become unsafe.
I don't want to see crowding on mass transit, public transport in our capital or anywhere else, and we're working very actively with TfL to ensure that what we do is we have more capacity, we discourage people from going to work during the peak, and that the operators, in particular TfL, lay on particularly more tube trains when those are necessary throughout the day. And a huge amount of work is being done. We also want to see proper marshalling at stations to prevent crowding of trains.
And another question, this one from the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, accusing the government of failing to protect people in care homes from COVID-19.
On Sunday, the Prime Minister said that we need to rapidly reverse the awful epidemic in our care homes. But earlier this year, and until the 12th of March, the government's own official advice was, and I'm quoting from it, it remains very unlikely that people receiving care in a care home will become infected. Yesterday's ONS figures showed that at least 40% of all deaths from COVID-19 were in care homes. Does the Prime Minister accept that the government was too slow to protect people in care homes?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't true that the advice said that, and actually we brought the lockdown in care homes ahead of the general lockdown.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer took issue with that response. In fact, he wrote a formal letter to the Prime Minister, quoting the advice that he was referencing, saying that ministers need to be accurate with the information that they give and asking Boris Johnson to return to Parliament to correct that record. I asked our political correspondent, Rob Watson, what the government had to say in response.
The Prime Minister wrote back basically saying, look, so far so good. We've been working constructively with the opposition, but we feel on this one it was taken somewhat out of context because a sentence was missed that said that that was essentially the advice for the time being, and there would be updates. But I think it's an interesting one. I think it shows a great deal of sensitivity on behalf of the government for obvious reasons. I mean, number one, the substance of the issue. I mean, an awful lot of people are in care homes in the UK. I think it's about 500,000. And I think because the more people are dying in care homes now than in hospitals, this has become a big focus of debate. And I think the other reason why it matters to the government is that by and large, Kasia, the opinion polls suggest that ratings for the government, the Prime Minister are holding up pretty well. People want to give the government the benefit of the doubt in a time of crisis. But opinion polling at all also suggests that there was concern at how other issues had been handled, such as the testing, protective equipment. There are also polls suggesting some concern about the switch to the Stay Alert message. So if there's another area where people might think the government wasn't handling things so well, then that would start potentially to chip into the confidence that so far people have shown in the government. I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a sensitive issue.
And of course, there needs to be confidence in the government, not least when in England, people who can't work from home are being encouraged to return back to work. How was the uptake with that, especially on public transport, Rob?
Well, I think it's a bit of a mixed picture. I mean, obviously, I think we've seen on the BBC some of those pictures of people being rammed on buses and tubes in London. I mean, that's, nothing like what it is normally, as we all know. But of course, it's a mixed picture across the UK because, of course, outside London, something like 2/3 of people don't use public transport; that they go by car. So it's a pretty mixed picture on the return to work.
It certainly is. Rob Watson there. Stay with us here on Outside Source. Still to come, we all know birds and bees spread pollen, but what about moths? Well, we'll be explaining the vital role that they play at night. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has disputed data which suggests care homes are the setting for a much higher proportion of deaths from COVID-19 in Scotland than in England.
I do want to challenge this, that the death toll in care homes is double what in Scotland what it is elsewhere in the UK. I do not believe that is the case. And I would point again to the study that has been published this morning that actually suggests that the disparity is down to under-reporting in the rest of the UK, and that Scotland's figures, which I think are more in line with the international examples, are accurate, whereas according to this study, the numbers dying in care homes in England and Wales is double what the official figures is showing. So I would really just caution people against the conclusion that twice now in the Chamber has been articulated, because I really don't believe that is true. I think if there is a disparity here, it comes from a problem in reporting elsewhere.
Welcome, you're watching Outside Source live from the BBC. Our main story, the EU is setting out plans for a phased return of travel across Europe as it tries to kickstart a tourism industry that has been decimated by this pandemic. Let's turn to the United States, where President Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, has been released from prison. It's due to coronavirus concerns. Now, Mr. Manafort is serving a 7.5-year term for tax and bank fraud offences. He will now complete his sentence under house arrest. Here's Catty Kay from Washington.
So he went to prison in June of 2018, and he was one of the most high-profile people caught up in the Mueller investigation into President Trump's potential links with Russia during the campaign. Paul Manafort eventually pleaded guilty to fraud because of lobbying that he had done, undisclosed lobbying for a pro-Russian entity in Ukraine. So he was sent to prison for 7.5 years, and now he's been released, and he's going to be back home in just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. This is causing some controversy because the U.S. Bureau of Prisons' own guidelines are that prisoners are eligible for release because of COVID if they've served half of their sentence or only have 18 months of their sentence left. Now, Paul Manafort doesn't follow either of those guidelines, and no one else from his prison has been released. So there is some criticism that this is politics at play here, and of course this is somebody who Donald Trump would have liked to have had released early.
And his release actually comes a week after the US Department of Justice moved to drop the criminal charges against the former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
Yeah, that also, you remember, got a criticism that it was political and that the Attorney General William Barr just threw those charges out. That's actually now been challenged by a US district judge who is raising the prospect that there could be a counter to the Attorney General's attempts to try and get Flynn out. But President Obama is the person who's weighed in on this most noticeably, saying that, there is questions about justice and the independence of the Justice Department in America because of the Flynn dismissal of the Flynn case by William Barr. He hasn't weighed in on Paul Manafort's case, but critics of President Trump are putting the two in the same sort of bracket.
Our thanks to Catty. Now we're going to stay in the United States because I want to show you some pictures from California where lockdown restrictions have begun easing. This is Manhattan Beach in LA County, which reopened just a few hours ago with new social distancing rules after a 6-week closure. Running, walking, swimming, surfing, all permitted, but sunbathing or having a picnic are still banned in America's most populous state. Let's hear more from Catty.
It looks like nearly 1 million students in California won't be going back to university in the fall as the state moves to shut down for a lot longer than people had anticipated. California's been an interesting case because it hasn't actually had a very high number of deaths, given that it's such a populous state. It hadn't had a very high number of deaths because of the coronavirus, but it's plateauing for a very long time. In other words, it's not coming down from that peak as quickly as California's state officials would like. So today, the announcement that California's universities won't be resuming in college classes. People will have to be online. Students will have to be online in the fall. That's a big blow to the students, of course. And Los Angeles County, which is the county of Los Angeles, has actually now said that it's going to extend its lockdown measures until the end of August. So summer in California, in Los Angeles County at least, is going to be pretty restricted, with residents having to stay home. There will be some relaxation of those restrictions, and the governor has laid out how restaurants might start again, how some businesses might start again. But overall this week, not great news for a state where the number of people who have died from the coronavirus has not actually been very high.
Our thanks to Catty Kay. Now, Indonesia, Bali in particular, also really dependent on tourism. And these are just some images that were sent into the newsroom here to give you an idea of life under lockdown on the Indonesian island. At this time of year, Bali is usually teeming with tourists, but not at the moment. All non-residents have been banned from entering since the virus restrictions were imposed. This video was in fact sent to us by Josh Simon, an Australian who's been living in Bali for 15 years. He's among a number of people behind Project Nazi, which is a charity supporting those struggling because of lockdown.
Bali thrives on tourism. Bali is tourism. Now, you cut off that main supply straight away, there is nothing left for Bali besides rice paddies and local farmers. They are thriving, the workers aren't. And that's the main issue here that we're seeing at the moment. From all races, all religions, from inter-islands, from Java, from Sulawesi, from Lombok, any workers that have come to work on Bali are now no longer working. So the guys who own restaurants here, coffee shops, myself, thought I've had a think tank and decided let's get a little project together, Project Nasi, to try and give back. Formulated a little life pack, what we call the family packs, which you get 4 kilos of rice, you get a few bags of noodles, sugar, salt, oil, spices like garlic, chili, and onion, all put together in a small takeaway bag that we call the family packs. That should last a family for roughly 3-4 days. We like to give something back, and our project, Project Nazi, is giving back to the people that have given us a home and a shelter for my past 15 years, for others 8 to 15, but it's just nice to give back. We're all out of work, so let's give something back to the islands.
Josh Simon behind Project Nasi, much more on Facebook if you want to check that out. Now, while butterflies and bees are seen as vital parts of our global ecosystem, moths have had a bad press for some time. They're seen by many as annoying creatures that can leave holes in our clothes. But Matt McGrath, our environment correspondent, says differently.
There are not too many moths around this evening here in Oxfordshire, Kasia, but the role of moths is increasingly being seen by scientists as absolutely crucial in terms of pollination. We all know about bees and butterflies, as you said, but the moths, they work at night, they're out of sight, they don't get much attention, but according to the scientists, they're doing an incredible job.
And I thought they'd be mainly focusing on your jumper because, of course, we know them for the damage that they do to our clothes. But in fact, they've got a huge, complex network. They travel for miles. How does it work?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They would be, some of them would be interested in jumpers, but the vast majority of moths don't do that. They travel at night, as you say, they pick up pollen on their sticky bellies and they transport it from flower to flower, and they pollinate things like brambles, so you get wild strawberries or wild blackberries and many other fruits and vegetables and plants like that. And they do this unseen, and they do it in some respects more effectively and more efficiently than bees and butterflies do.
You heard it here. Our thanks to Matt McGrath. I'll be back very shortly with much more here on Outside Source.